Can you hear me?
Yep.
Are you sure? How many people stayed from the last panel? Oh, look at you guys. You're awesome. I told you I promised not to talk as much. I lied. That's fine. So, we just went through a bit of the history. Okay, actually, I'm sorry. Before I start, because I just got yelled at. Please turn off your cell phones and or pagers if you're still rocking a pager. We are live webcasting, so please go to the microphones in the aisles when the Q&A session starts. At the end of this program, you must take everything and exit the auditorium. If you want to get in for Nolan's talk, you have to actually go upstairs and re-queue. So, sorry, but that's the way we're going to have to run it. And with that, we're going to jump right into it. So I'm very pleased to have another fine set of panelists with us today to talk about the future of video games. So directly to my, so again, for those who aren't here, my name is Chris Melissinos. I'm the curator for the Art of Video Games exhibition at the Smithsonian. We have a wonderful panel for you. Directly to my left is Mark DeLoura. I've known Mark, gosh, it's going on 12 years now? 13 years. Mark has been a senior technologist in the games industry for quite some time. He's had a variety of roles at Google, Nintendo, Sony, Ubisoft, and THQ. He also served as the editor-in-chief of Game Developer magazine back where I met Mark. So, Mr. Mark DeLoura. Directly to his left in the most awesome jacket you will ever see. And you can find Mr. Barnett at any trade show wearing this. Paul is the Senior Creative Director for Bioware Mythic. He developed AOL's first interactive game, Legends of Terrace, and is best known for Games Workshop's Warhammer Fantasy Battle Universe. Mr. Paul. Next we have Ken Levine, originally a screenwriter and playwright. He has designed games like Looking Glass's Thief, The Dark Project, and System Shock 2, which is quite frightening. And he served as a project director of BioShock for the PC and Xbox 360. And we have with us Kellee Santiago, who is the co-founder and current president of That Game Company. Was named as one of Kotaku's most influential women in games in 2010, and is a partner in Indie Fund, which helps indie developers reach and maintain financial independence. All right, take it away. So the panel that we just had before was really talking about the evolution of games. Starting at the beginning, and some of the problems that earliest game developers had, how to go to convey story, how to convey attention ideas through very minimalist technologies, and how still you're able to create inspired works and art that comes out of these things, even with technological limitations. For this panel, we want to talk about the future of games. You know, with technology becoming less and less of a barrier for describing worlds, for describing art, how are we going to harness these mediums moving forward, this technology base moving forward to create new experiences? So with that, I'd like to start by talking to Kellee about the idea behind one of the games that That Game Company did, which was Flow. Okay. And if you could talk to us. And the reason I want to start with this is it's a game that when I first experienced it was foreign yet familiar to me. And it wasn't until I actually started engaging with it that I better understood what was underneath. Can you talk to us a bit about how the game came about and its intent?
Yeah, it's funny because you get that question of like, how you guys make such innovative games? How do you make innovative games? And we're like, well, Flow is like Snake, so it's not so. Like, we just take old ideas and remix them essentially, which is the creative process. So Flow started as part of the MFA thesis project by my business partner Genova Chen. And his work was to apply the psychological theory of flow developed by Mahai Csikszentmihalyi. It's a great book on flow theory and sort of how we become, as humans, just the sense of fun and engaged in any given activity. And after doing this research and talking with various people in different fields on this state, many of them would describe it as a feeling of like flowing through water. When you're in that state, you sort of lose track of time because you're just so engaged. It came as a result of the response to our previous student project called Cloud. And Cloud was a game where we were really trying to take this idea of making a game about a subject that we felt hadn't been covered in the video game marketplace and which we thought could appeal to a wide variety of people regardless of their gamer or non-gamer status, which was the feeling of what it feels like to be a kid and daydream and while you're looking at the clouds. And so in the game you play as this boy who's trapped in a hospital who daydreams he can fly through the clouds, and it's a really simple game, but what we found is that it did attract people who wouldn't normally be downloading games onto their computers, but the controls were so hard and it sort of still relied on some ideas of what playing a game meant. So Genova wanted to take this flow theory and apply it to a game to sort of create an experience that was also, from a technological and interactive perspective, accessible to a wide variety of people. And so in Flow, it's a really simple game where you play as this abstract aquatic organism and you eat. That's your action. And through eating, you determine your experience as a player. You can eat these red foods that take you down to harder, more complex levels. You can eat blue foods that keep you sort of at a higher, more simpler level, and you can engage in combat with other creatures through eating them, or you can just experience it and keep swimming all the way down and just sort of see the sights in the game. So that's where the idea of flow came from.
Thank you. Ken, you and I spoke very briefly before we started the panel here, and one of the things I was describing to you is about how mechanics tend to stay the same. They tend to persist over time. Kellee describing flow as really Snake, right, which is a very rudimentary sort of game, one that actually has roots all the way back in Snafu on the Intellivision. Mr. Keeper is sitting right there in the front. In the games that you create, your worlds tend to be very expansive, tend to have a lot of very deep story and reflection, social reflection. But at the root, there are some base mechanics that are always true. Can you talk about how you appropriate those mechanics into the bigger stories that you try to tell?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a basic weirdness about making first-person shooters, because when first-person shooters or third-person games like Uncharted, you're essentially telling the story. Like, if I had killed like 500 people, I would not be known as Ken Levine, the crazy archaeologist, or Ken Levine, the genetically modified dude. I'd be known as Ken Levine, the insane mass killer. and that's, so we sort of start with this weird proposition. I mean, Kellee's games are really interesting because they sort of live by their own rules, and they establish a world, and there's an abstractness which allows not to have to explain away some of these notions. And I think there's a degree of math that people do in their heads when they play, certain games, and when they watch movies. The same. It's no different than Indiana Jones. He's not really an archaeologist. He's a psychopath. And I think the audience is willing to suspend their disbelief and do some degree of math where they say, well, maybe it's not really killing 6,000 people. Maybe it's killing 1 or 2, and that's okay because there's a reason. And so, but there's an important component of what makes a game, and there is generally a skill component. And lots of games have different ways of approaching that. Those games have a certain way, Mark's games have a different way, Paul's games have a different way, Mark's games have a different way. And we have a certain way. And the reason I sort of ended up in first-person shooters is, the first-person experience is really a nice experience for exploring worlds, a nice vehicle. And I'm not a big fan of like making puzzles. I don't know how to make a lot of puzzles. It's not really my thing. So, certainly it's killing people. Experience you do along with what, exploring the world and learning about whether it's Elizabeth and Booker in BioShock Infinite or Andrew Ryan in BioShock 1, I'm not looking down on shooting in games. I'm an old school gamer. I love Twitch mechanics, I love shooting, I love all that stuff. And I'm not, I don't think anybody's gonna look at my games and say, Ken Levine and his company are on the forefront of, new abstract game design components. That's not me. But a lot of it is so we can create these worlds and tell these stories that, what's blocking you from moving forward. A game like Heavy Rain deals with that problem by coming up with sort of puzzly experiences. But those are as abstract, as weird as mass murdering in their own way, because people don't really encounter those experiences in real life on a regular basis. But the audience makes allowances, so it really is, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Defending my own psychopath.
No. So here's how I would ask you. So in the context of a game like BioShock, you're still able to have this experience that you as the designer, right, the author of this experience wants to have. But within the gameplay framework, you present the player with choices that they have to figure out where their moral line lies, right? In terms of what are they going to attack within the game? What are they going to preserve? Where do they stand in terms of aggression or pacifism? And so your games, while ultimately you have to complete certain tasks to reach ultimate goals, you provide this pull of tension between it. Can you talk a bit about engaging the player and having them as part of the experience by constantly testing kind of their moral position?
I think the moral stuff, and I think the Bioware guys are far advanced over us in terms of the range of moral choices, and BioShock was rather simple. It was set. The game was set in a moral context, in a moral milieu. This whole milieu of this world. With objectivism and notions of commerce, and where does commerce begin and where does commerce end, and what's appropriate for that. But the actual choice was very simple. It was like, what do you do with this little girl? And I think that worked strictly because it was tied so much into the world. But it was very, very simple in a lot of ways, and most of it was quite visceral. It didn't work until, like, originally in the game, the creatures, there weren't no little sisters. There were these sort of sea slugs, large sea slugs that Big Daddies were protecting, and it was terrible because there was no empathy with the sea slug. So when you killed it, you're like, yeah, I just, killed the sea slug, whatever. But the reason Little Girls came about is because in order for that decision to be meaningful, in order to engage in the larger story of, Andrew Ryan's view of commerce at all costs, and essentially you were making that decision about commerce at all costs, we had to create empathy between the player and the thing they were making their decision about. And I think that's where that fell out of, and I think it was effective primarily because we were able to create empathy with little sisters. But that took a while to sort of get to that point and figure that out. Paul.
This is your fancy jacket. Maybe you can talk to us a bit about some of the work that you're currently doing at Mythic and how story is playing into the work that you're doing. Or, I'm sorry, Bioware Mythic.
No, I'm not going to do that.
I would love you to do
No, I'm
that.
not going to. I'll tell you why. Because when you rung me up and you said, come and talk about the future of computer games, I went and wrote loads of stuff down about the future of computer games.
Actually, I have a better question for you. I
got it in.
Hey, Paul, I have ideas. I've heard about these ideas. Like
There you go. That's
Golden
better
Age.
question.
Perhaps you could elaborate on what this thing you keep bringing up about your idea of the Golden Age is.
Oh, that's good. That's much better. I just don't want to... In all honesty, I just don't want to talk about product. I think future computer games is a really interesting question. I'd love to actually talk about it. So I did think about it. I came up with a couple of things. I'd love this panel to happen in the future and have more diversity. It's all right having pasty-faced white guys and one lady. That would be a pretty good future. I think we should have a future computer game. That'd be quite And then I thought about it, and I brought about everything about the future is going to come from the past. The people who are going to make the games in the future are the people who are playing the games now. And it's the game players today who are going to grow up and go, I'm not going to make games, it's going to be great. Which led me to one of the things I have, which I talk to people when they want a job. I talk about golden ages. And I talk about how every gamer I've met, and by that I mean gamer, not business, but every gamer I've ever met has a golden age. They have a period that they start becoming obsessed with games, and then they play them, and then something happens. And I think it's to do when they have to, they stop being, they have to pay bills. All that crap that your parents do. Once that starts, they stop their golden age. My golden age, through movies, Empire Strikes Back, through, to say anything with John Cusack. And within that period, I'm every game you could possibly want to play. I played the hell out of it. Every platform, everything. And what's interesting about my golden age is it's where I learned my prejudices about what games I like and I don't like. Hate simulators. They were all crap during my days. Love certain types of games. Don't like other types of games. Sometimes because they're on the wrong platform, I just never got to play them. So I just don't have a Super Nintendo. Love it. It was never an English. So I just never played it. That period defines my understanding of games. And it defines it so strongly, like so strongly, that now when I'm in a position to make games, it colours my view. What's also interesting about my golden age is every game before it, I can intellectually appreciate, but I don't actually give a crap about. It brought home to me when I went upstairs to the art of video games, which, by the way, congratulations to that. It must be art with a hardbound book. The book. Everything that isn't in my golden age, I went, yeah, whatever. And everything outside, everything after my golden age, I was like, yeah, I can appreciate it, I suppose. And then I noticed that you don't have Spectrum, which was what I played when I was a little kid. Specky fan, so I didn't have that. So what's interesting about golden age is the following. Every single person has a golden age, and every single person's golden age is the best golden age they could possibly have had. It is no one's fault that the first Final Fantasy they got was 11. I don't agree with that. It's not their fault, that's the one they got, and for them it's great. I suppose it's not their fault, they don't know why, where Doom came from, and they haven't played certain games. So when you meet people who are trying to get games made, this golden age that people are going through is going to be their golden age, and it's going to be the thing that the game players of today are going to use to make the games of tomorrow. And where I draw a lot of hope for the future is the current golden age is pretty bloody good. It's a phenomenal golden age. It's unbelievable. I can't appreciate it. I'm too old. But my little boy, Callum, he's 13 in England. He's 13 all over the world. I swear to you, I can see him at the age of 40 going, I want to make this game. It's like Minecraft. And I can hear people going, the stupid thing with squares that looks ugly. No, it's formative. It's really, really important. It matters. It looks really lame. You play it on a screen. It's going to be the games you're going to make. So I think video games is awesome.
So it's interesting. He has more. So what I find really interesting, you talk about the golden age thing, well, like I said, I started programming on VIC-20, right? 3,192 bytes of available space in which to craft a game. And I remember taking this system out of, storage and connecting it to a 52-inch screen television, and the resolution was 20 by 23 characters. And I had my oldest daughter in there, and I said, this is called a cassette. And what we do is we used to store games on this. So I want you to put this in here and type load and press play, and then we'll go get a drink. And we'll come back in, and it was all done. It curses Blake. I said, now type run, and she hit run, and up came this horribly janky Pac-Man clone that I typed in from Compute Gazette. And instantly, I was back in that golden age. And I said, oh my goodness, look at how beautiful this is. And so she goes, well, could you get on the internet with that? Honey, when I was your age, the internet didn't. Oh, that must must have been so boring. And I gets and then walks out. But, so we do have the golden age through which we kind of view a time where we have this period of exploration. We're framing the decisions we're making about the world, the observations that we make about the world in that way. But to the point that Ken and I first started discussing, you brought up, the same mechanics seem to persist over time. They persist from golden age to golden age. Now, Mark, you've worked on a wide variety of platforms, going all the way back to looking at virtual reality simulation in the early 90s to working on multiple platforms at Nintendo. Do we get locked into this golden age because we can't see anything beyond what was important to us at that moment in time, even though the same mechanics, the same choices we make persist? Can you give some thought about how you see the evolution of kind of segmentation across generations?
Yeah, I get sort of exasperated by the concepts of golden age because I see people like my parents listening to the Golden Oldies channel, and then I realize that now there's Golden Oldies channels for the music from my era.
And I'm like, that's Kasha Goo Goo.
Yeah. I think it is completely natural and normal that everybody has this golden age. I think you really hit on something there. Probably most likely because it's formative years, people haven't heard things, they're paying more attention to the music, it seems to relate to the experiences they're going through as an adolescent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I actually think that it's incumbent upon us to try to break that trap down. Sorry, man. He told me not to curse, but I'm not very good at that, so I apologize. Who I am. Yeah, when I see myself falling into a golden age, it's a trap, and I hate it because, as an example, I'm a jazz fan, and jazz had a golden age. It was in the 40s and 50s. I grew up with it in the 80s and the early 90s, and I was listening to all the music from the 40s and 50s. If you listen to modern jazz on the radio today, it's the same songs as the 40s and 50s. A lot of times the exact same songs, and there's some real comfort in that. I think it's the same thing with video games. I go back, I pull out my 2600, I play these games, and I'm like, oh, it's the Compute Gazette and all this. I have the exact same reaction. And then I go play one of games like Flow or Flower or Eco. I haven't played Journey yet. Coming soon. Can't wait. And these
you didn't get in the beta?
I did, actually. I did, but I only played it. I didn't want to spoil it, so I only played it for like 10 minutes. The games that break my mentality of what a game should be, those are the games I really get excited about. And kind of going back to what you were saying, Paul, about there's like 4 white people on stage, 5 white people on stage. One of the things in the future of video games that I get really excited about is when I meet people from other cultures. Like, I think it was just last Sunday, somebody walked up to me. He's like, I really want to talk to you about video games in South Africa because we have a really tiny community and we're trying to do stuff that these are games that reflect our culture and nobody understands our culture outside of people in South Africa. But wouldn't it be awesome if I could tell you what it was like to grow up as a kid in South Africa? And me, I'm like, yes. That would be awesome. I want to hear those games. The problem is getting his voice out is really hard. Clearly that's going to improve over time. The iPhone, I think, has been something that's helped break down barriers now that we can distribute easily. But it's still a hard challenge. And these guys have, around the world you find that the markets are smaller for video games, and so the voices are quieter. So I think it's like for all us pioneers up here, veterans, whatever, one of the things that I would like to challenge us all to do is to reach out into communities you don't expect games to come from, really pull those out and get them shared with the broader community.
With technology at the disposal of basically anybody who wants to develop an idea, a thought, a story within this medium. I mean, there's never been a greater point in history where people have had access to tools, access to technology, access to reach. And so we've kind of experienced this hyper-evolution of games, whereas Don was explaining in the prior panel, just as we kind of come to grips with one technology platform, you finally figured out how to wring out of it what you need. The next one has come along and kind of moved us away. Technology seems, again, we've kind of hit this point of expanse where, well, I don't have to work so hard to be photorealistic. I can kind of already get there. So now I can start limiting myself as an artist, as a storyteller, to pull back from that. to create more abstract notions. How do you see, and this is open to anyone that wants to start discussing this, how do you see the access to tools and the access to this broad base of technology? How do you feel it's going to start changing the way game developers look at crafting experiences, not only for themselves, but for, for our audience?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting right now with especially the rise of sort of the rebirth of 2D gaming through sort of the browser, in-browser technology, and also the app stores and mobile platforms. I kind of, I don't know about this theory of the golden age, actually. It kind of bothered me. I actually don't think, I think, I guess what I'm getting to is like that the sort of allowance that current technology has in sort of bringing us back to simplistic game designs and really giving tools to those artists that maybe did grow up with older 2D games and now have the opportunity to really easily access that technology and sort of express themselves through it. I think it shows pretty much that the golden age, our golden age or whatever, wasn't really so golden, because there's nothing from a design perspective that wasn't capable then in 2D that somehow we magically have now. It's just there wasn't a whole lot of critical and cultural discourse around games as a medium, and what those things are.
I think also a lot of games in that period were drawn from the thinking that made the arcade, which was get the quarter, get the quarter, get the quarter. And so they couldn't breathe in the same way. It took a while, even for us as game makers, to move away from the punishing the player way of thinking. The games were super, super hard, and they weren't designed to be experienced. They were designed to sort of crush your soul. and take your money, but that because there was an imperative there. But it's amazing how games, and there's a lot of things that just because of the nature of the formation of games define games. That all games for the longest time were about, fighting dragons or killing aliens, because the little weird nerds like me who were making it, that was the thing that they were interested in. And now you have, as the sort of the spate of developers grow, you have people like Kellee and Shinobu coming along with a different set of interests. A book about flow, right? And therefore they don't have, and games sort of became this thing about that's all about dragons and that's all about aliens, but that's a function of how it started, in the same way the quarter munching was a function of how it started. And it's hard to sort of move away from that.
Okay, so to that point, with the access to these platforms to tell stories, how do you feel video games will change in terms of the type of stories we want to tell? Do you think we're already telling the breadth of stories that can be told through the medium of games? I mean, what do you think is going to help propel that forward?
I don't know where games are going to be tomorrow. I mean, things are changing so fast. And I think that all you can do as a game developer is sort of be open to change and roll with it, rather than sort of trying to predict too far. Because 5 years ago, you held up an iPhone to somebody, you held up a Facebook screen to somebody, or you held up Kickstarter to somebody. Things change every month. That Kickstarter thing is going to be very powerful. And I don't know if it's going to exist in the current form it is right now, or it's going to evolve into something else. But this notion of a democratized patronage is incredibly powerful. Excuse me, that was a month ago. And so things are changing all the time, and I think it's a fun exercise, but I think at the end of the day it's sort of a fruitless exercise. You really do that. What you can train yourself to do is not reject it. It's all music isn't like this is a golden age argument as well. Well, it's strange because I like you guys, I grew up in the 80s too, and that's not my golden age because the music was it was terrible.
The golden age is what you get access to. There was games available, but I never got to see them, so I don't care. I played the ones I could get hold of. What's weird about my golden age is I have to understand that everyone else's is legitimate. And it's very hard because your instinct is to go, no, mine's best. And you go, well,
but I don't feel that way
right.
about the games I grew up with, I guess. I mean, that's what propelled me to make other games that I do. I don't know. I was a gamer, ever since I was little, but it was really hard for me. I mean, unless I'm still in my golden age, maybe, but it was really hard hard for me until really the last few years to answer that question of what's your favorite game of all time. Like, I know the games I've spent time on, but I don't know, the ones that like grabbed me emotionally and have moved me, I mean, this really have just happened in the last few years.
I think, it's interesting. I think golden age can change too. I had the same, set of, growth experiences you guys do. We all grew up with the same platforms and everything. But a new golden age for me is now I play games with my kids. And so the games that I'm choosing to play and the reward that comes out of that gameplay is as valuable, if not more so, than what I remember. I mean, we tend to look back with very fond memories about very, key critical things in our past. And I completely agree with you. We look back with that resonance of, well, of course, my experience with my Big 20 is better than yours with your Big 20 because clearly yours was inferior.
I call that game track. It's like the soundtrack of your life.
Hold on a minute. You have something called game track?
I do, yeah.
Paul, perhaps you could describe it.
Well, it's because the reason I bring up the goal is I bring up the interviews because I've got to snap them out of it because I want them to be creative now. I don't want to try and make their past. Game track was when I realized that I don't give a crap about music that much, but if you put on a certain loading screen sound or a certain screen or a certain box, I instantly teleport back to wherever I was in my life when that happened. And I remember where I was sitting, what I was doing, what the smell from, what my mother was, what the wallpaper looked like. It's the strangest thing. I have a very strong, life memory. And so these games, when I'm up there at the exhibit, every time I see a game that's on my game track, I go, ooh. And so I think that as game makers, one of the things to aim for is to try and make a game worthy of going on someone's game track. And for some people, those games are just because they got it for Christmas and they liked it and had fun. But imagine actually setting out, I think Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 together is a generational game track game. I think there are groups of people who will remember. I remember that. I remember playing 1, 2, 3, getting to the end. But one of the other things I think is fascinating about the future of games, I've identified two things that I think are really interesting. First, technology went backwards. One of the few times it's ever happened. Up until then, games were always about higher fidelity, more triangles, more polygons, more. And all of a sudden, we slipped backwards. Be it trying to make it work on a phone, or trying to make it work in a browser, trying to get a download time. And that limitation was fabulous.
That's normal, though. We started off with arcade games. We jumped back to home consoles. We went forward to home consoles, then we jumped back to handhelds, and we're forward to handhelds, and then we're jumping back to phones. What's the next thing going to be?
That's been the big breakthrough this time. Oh, well, you're older than me.
No.
The other thing that's happened along with that is a breadth of the people who play games. You say to someone, are you a gamer? And they'll go, yes or no. If you're a gamer, how many hours do you play games a week? Well, he has done a lot of research. It's about 19. Are you not a gamer? No, absolutely not. I do not identify. But you've got access to things on your phone. And how many hours do you do? 12 hours. And you're a gamer then. And then you get, what is the average gamer age? It's really high now. And so you've got this weird thing of, games have become everywhere. It's just, for the hardcore people, it's the wrong games. I'm supposed to be playing Facebook games. It's the wrong type of games. We're all supposed to be playing big console games. And so there's more people playing.
That's right, Tom. And I think I get questions all the time like, well, do you think games should be this or do you think games should be that? I think that's a sad question. I think games should be whatever floats anybody's boat. And I read that a lot, especially a lot of developers get incensed when people are working in a different space. And, especially, I think on the indie side, especially because they feel really passionate, that games should never, like there are a lot of people who say games should, like World of Warcraft is evil because it's this gambling mechanic. And yeah, it is this gambling mechanic. So what? It's fun, and you should make the game you want to make, and you should make the game you should make, and you should make the game you want to make. It's all, I think it's all good. I'm not sure where that kind of snobbery comes from.
And it's the changing of gaming. There was lean-in gaming on PCs, lean-back gaming on consoles, and then there's this curl-up gaming on your sort of thing. It's really quite interesting. And the other thing I do when people come for interviews, I talk to them, is I point out that a lot of games, HD games, high-definition games, they're there to reassure and reflect, whereas the indie space is there to challenge and champion. And you just got to get used to those two different ways. They're okay. We can all live together because we're all making games. Isn't it kind of cool? And
Well, I mean, but beyond like a sense of snobbery, I think there is reason to have genuine concern as games take a larger place in our culture. That's why we want to have these conversations right now, because there's sort of an opportunity to really shape what we're thinking about as an industry and sort of talk about these issues before they sort of spiral out of any sense of control. I think like when you look at television, and
but isn't that what art is? Art is about spiraling out of control. Like I don't want my art in control. I want it out of control.
Well, but then we can still have a conversation around what sort of artistic responsibility. If it is art, then there's artistic responsibility that goes along with that as makers. Just as though if you want to own a restaurant, you can choose to create a restaurant that uses local food and has all these great processes, or you can choose to own a McDonald's. And there are things that are problematic about McDonald's food and the way that they add additives and sugar to have greater desire. That's sort of not good for you.
Yeah, but I don't think ideas are trans fats.
Television is a great example of this, where we have, yes, regulations that prevent cursing and from nudity, but you still have the Jersey Shore doing what they do. And that on our children, on us, on what it means for American culture or the global culture.
Sure, but I think it's fascinating actually to see those things that are a little maybe out of our comfort zone or out of control. I agree with you. You should make the art that expresses who you are and the message you want to express. You're reminding me of this game a few years ago. I think it was in an indie game festival. It was a knockoff of Grand Theft Auto, but it was done as a game about vegetarianism. Pretty amazing. Try to track that one down.
It was Steer Madness, I think.
Yeah.
That was trying to, release all of your cow, brethren.
But I think the things that are most interesting to me right now, and have been for a few years, are the things that I don't expect. And I'll cross over into danger territory by telling you about one of them. So it's like 3 or 4 years ago, there was a bunch of news in the newspapers about how horrible it was that somebody had created a game that was all about shooting our troops in Iraq. And my first thought was, who made that? And I want to see that, and what is all that about? And so I tracked this guy down. And the first thing he told me is, that was a demo, I pitched it to a publisher, they ripped it off, they shipped it before it was done. I was like, well, that sounds really familiar. I've heard the same story from game developers time and time again. So I felt a kinship with him there, but then what he said to me was, look, I'm just trying to express what I feel and what the people around me feel. And that's what this is about. I'm making a game that's my art expression. So, nobody should have a problem with this. Because that's what I totally agree with that.
And I think it's fine if you yourself want to say, these are my limits, this is what I'm comfortable with, this is what I'm not. That's great. And I think we all do that. Like we all do that, and we have different standards for that. You have a set of standards, you have a set of standards, I have a set of standards. But as soon as somebody else comes in and starts saying that, that's when I get very, very nervous.
Like who?
Anybody. It is nobody's business in the universe. They can not buy it. That's totally fine.
Right.
But it's nobody's business how I want to express myself as long as I'm not hurting anybody.
This is what we're talking about.
Well, yeah, but we should be able to have a dialogue about it, right? Without dismissing it as snobbery or judgmental. I think that's what's important about the exhibit. There's no kind of dialogue.
See, but that's the point of this, right? Is that it is very easy because the medium is so nascent, because we've only lived with this for a period of 40 years, because when we created computers and we created gameplay with computers, we did something that is against human nature. Because we told people it was okay to play alone. We told people it was okay to be solitary. It was okay to use a computer as a surrogate for a human interaction. When it goes against the very nature of what it means to be human. We want to communicate, we want to discover, we want to understand each other, we want to find conflict, we want to find teams. We use gameplay as a way to discover more about our world. Once we opened up the platform for connection, for global connection, made it easy for people to do this. There's no wonder in my mind whatsoever as to why people are playing so many games online. Why the average, the largest segment of online gamers in America are women over the age of 35, right? It has fundamentally changed The way we're able to go ahead and use this medium to show every point of view, to allow art in all of its forms to flourish. The problem we have is that it is so easy to dismiss it on its face, on the surface, for what we believe it to be, because it's been dismissed its entire progression. I think we're at the point now, for the first time, in the history of the games industry, in the history of technology, in the history of humanity, we have the first children who grew up playing these, who understood there was more to the medium, more to the story, raising children of their own. And to me, I think it is absolutely tremendous that we're standing right at the precipice of this, because the art that is going to come out of that movement, the art that's going to happen over the next 10 years, is going to be staggering, right? The social messages, the things that we want to impart on society, is just going to absolutely blossom moving forward. So it seems like we've just kind of been building up all this time to the jumping off point now.
It's weird that you say that games could be isolating, because you could not find a person more isolated than me when I was in 6th or 7th grade. I had no friends, I had no connections, I was lonely, I was weird, and games were my Atari was my companion, right? And D&D, which at the time, Dungeons and Dragons, which at the time people probably don't remember, that was one of those things that was corrupting our children. If you were there, you remember it was, no joke, it was a serious conversation, a TV movie with Tom Hanks, where somebody got involved with this D&D group, and then, oh my God, what happened? They ended up dead and drugs. And it was done, and when I heard two people over talking on the bus in the 9th grade about Dungeons and Dragons, and I started talking to them, and one of those guys, and then I had, for the first time really in my childhood, then I found my friends. I found a group of friends. I'm still friends with this guy to this day, and it absolutely was, it did not shut my world down, it opened my world up. And I'm forever grateful. And those ideas were dangerous, and they were strange, and they were weird, and they were all I had. And so I'm forever grateful to games for that.
No, and I didn't say it was a problem that we didn't.
No.
It's that we all did.
That's a perception.
Right, and that was, that's the problem, it's the perception. I mean, my mother would always tell me, why are you doing this? Go outside and get some air. All right, I got it. We've done that, sorry. We actually took a black and white television and the Big 20 out into the backyard. And actually we're out there playing some terrible, I think it was, I can't remember the name right now. Radar Rat Race.
The cab driver driving me in asked me where I was going. I said, I'm going to do art video games. And do you do anything with video games? Well, not really. But sort of. And he said, I need your advice. I said, what's that? I said, how can I stop my child playing computer games? I was like, I'm not sure I'm the right person. Because like he obsessively plays them all the time, I said, oh, okay, that's interesting. And he said, it's not good for him. I said, oddly enough, my mother had a very similar attitude to me. I was in my bedroom constantly playing on my computer, and she was always going, go outside, get some exercise, get some sun, go out and play with other people. And all those people who were outside, if I went outside, would beat me up and be mean to me. And now, of course, when I go home and I'm driving past, they're there holding up stop signs and waving me through. And so I'm sort of from the other side, which is, no, you should play more games. Whichever way it is. So
That's right. To the point of play more games, you're talking about the golden age. I'd love to, not that you can stop me, I'm going to share this story with you, which had this juxtaposition that struck me and my wife as we were sitting and discussing this as just the craziest, bizarre thing. When the Wii was released, and we looked at how controls and new types of gameplay, which are old types of gameplay, ping pong, tennis, these sorts of things, kind of opened up the door to acceptance, right, of games of a different generation. My parents, my father and my stepmother, they had wanted a Wii for Christmas. They couldn't get one. They bought one at like a silent auction for I think $600 because they wanted one so desperately. And then they asked me for games for Christmas. So my parents were asking me to get them games for Christmas. Now, it gets better. One night, we had gotten, our kids' homework done and got them all to bed, and it's like, oh, we're exhausted, let's watch a little TV and sit down. It must have been 10:30 at night or so. The phone rings, And it's my stepmother, and there's all this noise in the background, and she says, we're having trouble getting these 2 controllers connected to the Wii. What do we need to do? And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? It's Wednesday night at 10:30. I'm trying to play it. All right, what game is it? My wife's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I don't know, just come back. And I'm like, oh no, that's not a 4-player game, that's 2 players. Okay, we gotta go, it's my turn, bye. And she All right, before we open this up to some Q&A, what I really want to talk about is, I'd like us, you all, I've spoken enough, to take yourself a little bit outside of the type of games you do, and if you could, we'll start with Kellee, tell me some things that you would hope for the future of games, right? What video games could achieve in the world, something that sits maybe apart from where you think we are today. What would be kind of your biggest hopes for where you think games could go?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of borrowing from what Mark said at the beginning, which is that my biggest hope is that the people who are making games and what those people look like completely changes. I think that's where we're going to see new types of stories and new types of experiences. And yeah, I mean, I think with the more accessible technology and distribution channels, that's what's really exploded in just the last 5 years and has impacted it so much. The stories around the types of people who are finding success, however rare or huge they may be on the App Store, it has sort of, I think, flipped a switch for a lot of people saying like, oh, well, I could do that too, and it's at least opened them up to the possibility of thinking about making games themselves and telling their own stories. And I think that's what I'm excited for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's interesting about games is those surprises we get, and I think they're becoming much more democratized, like you're saying, with the App Store and things like Kickstarter, in terms of people feeling it's not something that a bunch of guys in suits decide. It's a bunch of things. It's things that we decide, that individuals decide. And certainly when I was coming up, and I'm sure when those guys were coming up, it was already sort of like the record industry. It was formed. There were people who had the funding, and as the requirement for funding goes down, for external funding goes down, I think the creativity is naturally going to go up. But I also think that there's going to be cycles, like the Kickstarter thing. Probably there's going to be some giant thing that explodes and causes a problem there, and then there's going to be some weird hybrid model with some funding coming in, and venture capital people getting interested in this create excitement in this space, and so the future is not really clear. But I think the fluidity of the funding model is going to be the most exciting driver for as bringing new people in and different kinds of people in, and also for the creative process. So you don't need to convince a marketing person that this is going to be a successful idea. I mean, Minecraft's a great example. If you try to convince a marketing guy of that probably would be a really hard sell.
That's true. What do I think? I think that it's going to be easier I think it's easier right now to be a computer game maker. What you should do is get hold of anything, and no matter what anyone says, make something, no matter how good it is, and put it out. No matter if anyone buys it, it doesn't matter, because then you're a game maker. From then on, the only thing you have to worry about is budget, scope, and ideas. At that point, so I think that's really, really, really exciting, and I'm really, really impressed with. When I started, there was no way of going to school to learn how to do this. Then there were some courses that started up that were terrible, and now there are some courses that are actually astonishing. I've been blessed to go to lots of different universities and see them. Ones where they run like actual little studios, and they have little budgets and that, and they're making games, they're doing stuff, and it's like big and really long, just played recently. So there's a whole new wave of people coming up. They're fearless, they expect success, they have wide-ranging views, they're not built on the same sort of grounds that I came from, and they want to make games. They don't want to make games that are art, they want to make games that are awesome. And that's the place I like it. I don't want to make art, I want to make awesome. So I'm very, very happy about it.
Before you go, typically, more times than not, an artist doesn't get to choose whether or not their work becomes art. So while you want to go ahead, you can say, I'm an artist, I can say that every time I put a brush to canvas, what I'm creating is art that will be held up or will aspire to be labeled as art. We can all make the accurate argument that if anything comes out of expression, it's art. It's art. When we're talking about the context of it being recognized by a broader segment of the population as art, it's interesting that while I agree that games need to be awesome first, because terrible games are terrible games, regardless of how beautiful they are, regardless of what the message is. If you can't connect with the player in some meaningful way, if the mechanics don't work, if there's frustration that removes them from what it is you're trying to say, then it falls apart. So I agree 100% that games should be awesome. But I think it's also important to recognize that where the next great games that are viewed as artful, are not necessarily ones that we can discern. They're not ones that we really have a say in, right? One can argue that Minecraft is an extraordinarily beautiful game, much more artistic, much, held up more as art than so many more photorealistic games or games that really push, massive amounts of space, because within it you have imbued the kind of the desire and the creativity of the player themselves, and you kind of self-reflect on that. So I just want to make the point that while I agree 100%, it's going to be awesome first and foremost. Where art's going to come from is anywhere. I mean, we can't predict that. So trying to go ahead and, because you're not trying to create art, may not be entirely in your control. They may deem what you think is just awesome as art.
The more that gamers get old, and then they have money, and then they want to invest in museums, and they want to invest stuff, and they want to run for president because they were gamers, the more they will legitimize this, that's great. And the thing they'll talk about will be awesome games. They will say are art, and I'm all for that.
All right.
I forget what the original question was.
The original question was, what is your hope for the future of video games? Where do you think they can actually go? What can they teach us?
Yeah, well, I guess I vented about that a little bit earlier, but being a technologist, I feel it's incumbent upon me to represent my peoples, the engineers. And I think it's been fascinating to me this day because we got to hear about the guys who brought us some television, and gentleman who bought us Pitfalls right down here at the front row.
Right, Mr. David Crane.
Fantastic. Ran Robin Miller over here, and I still remember the opening chime to Myst. It plays in my dreams, to your point about game tracks. And I think about all of the constraints that they all faced as they were making games, and I think it's easy, especially as a technologist, as we go forward from platform to platform to platform, we get more memory and more CPU and more resolution and more channels of audio to think, wow, we can do anything we want. But then I think about, I'm going to come back to you again, Kellee, because I think about the way I felt when I played Flower for the first time. And the way I felt was, I would never have made this game, because the constraints that I grew up inside of, this was not something that I would conceive of. The tools that I had, the horsepower I had, I was trying to replicate other things that I'd seen and gone through. And so what gives me great hope is thinking that for me, looking back, when I got my start and the constraints that were there, the people who are looking at the platforms we have now and thinking that they're constrained on these platforms, what are they going to be doing in 15, 20 years? Like, this is what I get excited about. I want to see when, the constraints of today seem like I'm some primitive guy. I've got handcuffs. I can't even make a character articulate properly on screen. What are you going to do when you've got 10x the horsepower and 5 channels of video around you in 360 degrees? I don't know what it's going to be like, but I hope it's a lot more immersive, and I hope there's a lot more educational content. That's what you should.
Right. Question from the audience, if you could say your name and then ask your question, and you were waiting in line last time, so you get to go first.
Thank you. I'm Michael, and I've got a question about what you guys think of really pretentious indie games. I follow independent games a lot, and it used to be that for every like, legitimately good indie game you get, like I don't know, Cave Story or Bastion or something, you get a dozen games that are just like, a very minimalist platformer with a disembodied voice reading poetry or something. And like whenever I play one of those games, I'm imagining like, what's his name? That soup can guy.
Warhol.
Yes, Andy Warhol. Talking to a cat about like how it's his artistic vision and that it represents a zeitgeist or something stupid like that. So what do you have to say to people who make really pretentious indie games?
I would say to you, just don't buy those games.
I mean, they're like usually flash games.
Don't play those games. I mean, it's as a creative medium, as an artistic medium, it should support a wide variety of experiences, and not everyone has to play my games, and I don't think anyone here thinks everyone has to like our games. So
The broader range of expression out there is the better, I think.
Yeah.
Look, you read an interview with somebody and it may annoy you, but don't read that interview. I think is the thing. But out of that game you're talking about, with with a disembodied voice, somebody's going to come along and make some awesome first-person shooter, take an idea out of that you're going to love, but they're going to steal an idea out of that, and they're going to turn it into something that maybe is more to your taste. And I steal ideas from everywhere. I see really strange things you would never expect. And I think that's the value, even to a guy like you, is there's going to be an idea that you're going to love someday that you have no idea comes from some guy living in his mom's basement, writing poetry.
Nick from Princeton again. So I have to say, Kellee, you are my hero. Because you talked about trans fat. I was a major nutrition in college, and I know it seems a little irrelevant, but it is totally relevant because I know what you were talking about before about responsibility as game developers and what it impacts on society. And I think that's what you were getting about food and about how it interacts with society. And I think regardless of the medium, whether it's video games, food, movies, the person that's creating that has the responsibility to do whatever they want. But within that, they have to realize the impact that they're doing and the audience that they're addressing. So I love that you stood up for the trans fat, but at the same time, I kind of have a question, what do you think about this censorship? I mean, look at ESRB, and then you've got SOPA and PIPA that like try to charge in and take away that sort of creativity. So I think, just personally, if ask yourself and tell us back, what do you think about the restriction on that kind of creative, juices that flow?
yeah, I mean, obviously, this is with the grain of salt that I've not been involved in any of those, organizations or understand the kind of work that they do or the thinking that goes into it. But I personally feel like a better leverage of that energy and those dollars spent is into supporting works that we think are interesting or valuable, or ones that we want, so the kinds that we want to see more of, as opposed to punishing people that whose works we don't necessarily agree with. But yeah, I mean, Ken said it well, is that there's an element that does have to be out of control. Like I don't think it should be restricted. I think what should be ultimately supported is exactly what's happening here at the Smithsonian, is that we have a dialogue about it. I think that's really the most important thing, that as long as we're talking about it, as long as we're empowering families to talk with one another about it, that's what's really important.
I think your point is great. It's like the problems breed in the shadows, where there's no sunlight. And when people don't understand, when they don't really know what they're talking about, like very rarely do you hear somebody who's truly informed about games, talking in apocalyptic terms about them. It's usually people who have no idea what they're talking about. And you can go through the transcript of Schwarzenegger versus was it ESA versus Schwarzenegger, and you see some really misinformed understanding of how games work in that opinion, written by the highest court in the land. And that's a little. Listen, I'm thrilled that the decision was what it was, but it was kind of, if you really read into it, it was kind of a near thing. And most of it is because those people have no understanding of the meaning.
Right, and it's the point we discussed before. It's time will solve that problem, right? As those of us that grew up with this, that understanding, I continue to impart that to younger generations, and they grow up in the understanding. It's like any other form of media that's come before, it's like any other form of art that has broken through traditional art boundaries, right? This is a medium whose time is starting right now, is one that we're going to continue to move forward.
Well, time and through a lot of hard work and doing, I mean, really, like stuff like this that says, this isn't just this thing your kids do in the basement. Like, we need to be talking about this and what it means and what we want to see out of that. I know.
Thank you for the question. Over here, please.
Yeah, my question was,
Say who you are.
what's that?
Say who you are.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Russell, and my question is based on actually something that was talked about in both panels, arcade games. I'm sure you can agree that even just the cabinets of those arcade games have artistic value. And I miss the arcades. They seem to be dying, almost dead at this point. And for me, they were a huge part of my childhood socially. And I was wondering what your opinions on the traditional arcade versus today's arcade with PSN, XBLA, and the virtual console are.
Who misses arcade? What's the greatest arcade game ever made? It's not an opinion, it's Robotron 2084. I mean, I think, quite honestly, during the era of, really the golden era of arcades, right, it's the same sort of issues that I think the earliest game systems had, which is the technology wasn't advanced enough or sufficient enough to fully describe what the gameplay was supposed to be, what the story was supposed to be. And so the cabinet, the side art, the marquee, all of these things kind of brought together a bigger world view, painted a larger scope of what you were engaging in. You look at the side art cabinet for Space Invaders, I mean, the giant monster never even appears in the game, but it was trying to inform what it is that you were kind of faced when all of a sudden you saw these very rudimentary squid-like figures, moving down the screen. And so I think it's just as we are able to more fully express the worlds we want to create, the stories we want to tell, some of that kind of falls away because they're now inside the game as opposed to sitting as materials outside the game. That's one perspective.
Yeah, I mean, another, I think, permutation of it is how is connected play and the increase in experiences we can use on our mobile phone to connect with one another in the real world as well. Things like Highlight, which is coming out to connect with other people. Because I think that was a really important part of it, is like the physical community aspect of it. The opportunity to meet other people who are like you.
Unfortunately, the death of arcades in America occurred at the death of roller rinks.
That's the real
That is the real
Yeah, for me, I think that the arcade phenomenon, a lot of it was a social aspect that made it popular. For me, I could care less about talking to other people when I went to an arcade. I have to admit, it was all about the games. I think conventional wisdom among folks that I've talked to is that one of the main reasons the arcades went away is that they didn't provide a unique experience as compared to the home consoles. And you can kind of see now if you go to somewhere like Dave & Buster's or somewhere like this, they're still trying to differentiate themselves by having stereo head-mounted displays or things that you can engage with. Yeah, pneumatic things like the boxing thing or whatever. Unfortunately, I don't see the arcades really coming back. It was a time that was exciting and happy to have been there, but it lasted longer in Japan than here, certainly. So if you go to Japan, there's still a few around. But I want to put in a plug for one thing. If you haven't heard of the Arcade Ambiance website, if you love the arcades and you want to get taken back to the game track of your life, somebody has gone through and used MAME, played a whole bunch of games from different periods, so from 81, from 85, from 92, recorded all the audio, mixed it spatially, and then put it out as MP3. So
those tracks are literally 2 to 3 hours long.
yeah.
So it's just
played with
Luna arcade, you can sit there and go, oh, I know exactly what that is. If you listen to all 2 hours in a row, then you need to go talk to Thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
Yes, Daniel Wallace. I'm a human factors engineer, and so I'd like to talk to the technologist here a little bit about the future of the technology side, especially with respect to how we can exploit some of the sensory perceptual capabilities and limitations of people without having a whole lot of expensive apparatus. That is, where do you see that going without huge, multi-million-dollar immersive environments?
Yeah, well, if you're a human factors guy, you've probably seen a lot of the same stuff I have. I mean, I came out of virtual reality research in the late 80s, early 90s, and I loved stereo head-mounted displays. But at the time, they weighed about 25 pounds, and putting 2 CRTs in front of your eyeballs seems like a bad idea, so they weren't popular. However, at the time, one of the things that the team I was working with was really working on was putting a micro laser. Again, it sounds like a bad idea. in the hinge points of your glasses, but a micro laser that was so low wattage that it could draw an image over your visual environment and not harm you.
Currently really hot. Why am I sweating so much?
But I think that that technology has slowly proceeded forward. You see the little Pico projectors now as maybe one example of that. But I think it highlights what has to happen to some technology before they really gain wide use. I really want to see immersivity come to games where I can turn my head and not lose the scene. It's like Kinect is a half step towards that. Now it knows that I turned my head, but if it adjusts the scene, I can't tell because I'm not looking at the TV anymore. That's a problem. So I'm hoping we'll get to a point. There's rumors about these goggles or glasses from Google that I think would be an interesting step toward where we're going with that. Anyway, so a stereo head-mounted display I think would be fascinating. You do see the price of all kinds of sensors coming down, as I'm sure you know. Now I've got a little Fitbit in my pocket. It tracks how many steps I walk. And these micro accelerometers I think can be used for a lot. But if you require a player to put on a wristband before they play their game, that might be a barrier to entry. The Wii was successful in using accelerometers, but it used the same sort of controller modality we were all familiar with. So we pick it up and that works great. The Kinect works great because it looks at you, so you don't have to wear sensors. And I think the immediate next generation of machines are probably going to incorporate more of that technology than a worn sensor technology. But I hope that we get to the point where there's some middle ground where you can improve the fidelity of your experience if you're willing to put on a sensor-laden suit or something.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Here.
Now that we've started studying game design as a field, we've first now as PhDs began to study the science of reward and pleasure. We've seen this put to more mundane already in intuitive forms, like the McDonald's Monopoly game, where you get the reward of buying fries by getting the royal sticker. Do you see this going further, more pervading everyday life outside of our strict entertainment time?
So you're talking about gamification, I think, right? So here is my street pass. I go back to the plaza. I have 10 more people that I just collected. I think there are ways that it's possible to go in and bring very meaningful gameplay to our lives. I mean, we use game theory, we use the discussion of game mechanics components and everything from business to military to sports. So it's interesting how you appropriate it. The important thing is to make sure that we don't abuse it. That we make sure that we are not overburdening society, we're not overburdening ourselves with constantly trying to game the system for just arbitrary or irrelevant benefit. I don't know how many people Foursquare, I don't, because I'm not going to punch into this machine every single time, every time I'm jumping in. Well, first of all, it's like, okay, hey, I just landed in Spain. Oh, you mean your house is empty? So we have to be very careful, I think, and cognizant of what it is we do. I think there's an appropriate way to use them to create social benefit, But like with anything else, we just have to temper the desire to gamify everything with, what I think is probably responsible. Any other?
Yeah, I mean, I think great games utilize a similar underlying understanding of human psychology and anthropology. And so what just bothers me in sort of the gamification, and that's a great example with that, is like literally taking a game mechanic that is in another game and applying it to something in the real world, as opposed to approaching it from a perspective of, okay, we want I want my team to be more engaged on a day-to-day and weekly process. So how can we apply the design, good design of engaging systems to help them in that process, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you have to be delicate about what you gamify. I think for me, the one that pops is like, you absolutely should gamify education. Just because my experience of learning math as a third grader, my third grade teacher, got me to a certain point, and then she started giving me these workbooks that were just puzzles of crazy math problems, and I'd fill out the crazy math problem, I'd give you a letter, I'd put it in a phrase, and eventually I'd get the whole phrase, and I guess I win. I think you can really, I don't want to say all students are going to be motivated by this, but I think a lot of students could be motivated by game-like ideas, and we should totally explain it.
But at the same time, I think there are limits to that as well, because I think it's bad to teach kids that everything should be fun and easily and immediately gratifying, because sometimes problems are hard, and sometimes you need to learn something and it's kind of boring, and you have to, that's a skill as well. So.
I have plenty of boring experiences too, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, to your point though, one of the things I was not very good at doing when I was a kid was math. And I had a very difficult time doing it because I tend to be a very visual person. But when I had to do math to create a grid within a game, or to create a character generator, or do something like that, I could do it very easily. And so because, to your point, there was pleasure in overcoming the problem that was greater than just overcoming the problem itself. And so I think there is a very real, important notion in entertainment to help people understand how to adopt, how to adapt, how to get past some very difficult barriers. So,
isn't that just interested in engagement? Just
right.
Nothing to do with games.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's things we've learned by making games to create engaging experiences that, I think other people in the field should absolutely know.
My dad can't remember anything, but you ask him anything about Manchester United Football Club, of any year, of any game, and he has statistics coming out of his brain. He doesn't know where his car keys are. It's because he's engaged and entertained. I mean, I think there's a pernicious and crazy darkness about gamification or anything. It's some sort of madness that we shouldn't be doing. Mobile phones are changing the world. People get all confused about it. Get people engaged and happy, they learn stuff. Amazement. I think for years.
Right.
Next question.
My name is Sam. What do you think of the whole idea where community has influence on making a game story, like for Paul with Bioware, because I guess of the current fiasco going on right now. For one, with the Mass Effect endings.
If computer games are art, then I fully endorse the author of the artwork to have a statement about what they believe should happen. Just that J.K. Rowling can end her books and say that's the end of Harry Potter.
I love Bioshock, so.
I want to speak to this as well, because I think it's an important moment. I think not only do I believe in the authorial intent of Bioware in this situation, and I think if those people got what they wanted and they wrote their ending, they would be very disappointed in the feeling, the emotional feeling that they got, because then it's just, there's this, then it's not, they didn't really create it and it's not something that's being communicated to them. It becomes, it's like when people want to go see, like, oh, I'd love to see Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr and Jimmy Page play Hey Jude. And then you go there and actually it's not that good because it's something new, it's something exciting, it's not challenging you. And I think that it's in this whole thing is making me a little bit sad because I don't think anybody would get what they wanted if that happened.
Great. Thank you. Next question, please.
My name's Brandon, and I admit to taking the TV outside, gathering the neighborhood kids, like Super Smash Bros. And winning every single game online. My question deals with just the beginning of the game design process. You have an idea, and you're trying to build your team. My question's about communication. What are you looking for in the people that you're working with, and how in the world do you convey to them this game that's in your head?
Well, first of all, it's generally not in your head. It's if you're not, the purpose of a team is to build up a group of people who are contributing, and I think that's really important because if you don't, if you think it's all going to come out of one game developer I knew, who I shall not name, once said that he wished he had a machine that could transfer his ideas into an actual game, and that was kind of sad to me because my favorite part of making games is working with the people I work with, and my favorite part is when they come up with stuff so I don't have to. You come to work and that thing's there and you're like, oh, that's great, I'm going to go home. The worst thing is being responsible. The more you're responsible for it, the worse, in some degree, it is, and the harder it is. So, but I think to your point, communication, I think, and especially like, a Bioware Infinite team has grown and is about 100 and something people now. And frankly, it is the biggest problem, without a doubt, that people do not know what's going on in the game because just figuring out what to communicate and when to communicate it, because we could send everybody home every night with a transcript of every meeting that we had and force everybody to read it, but then the game's never getting done. So it's really, I think, one of our biggest challenges on the management side is figuring out what to communicate and when to communicate it and how to communicate it. And it's going to be it is by far our hardest problem.
Yeah, I mean, if I could say it, I wouldn't have to make a game about it. So I just say, don't be too frustrated with an inability to clearly communicate, but just in our process, it's sort of an ongoing and continual process of having dialogue, creating sentences and phrases, and also beats of movies or a piece of music. When you're like, oh, this song, this is how I want it to feel. That can really be a good way to get everyone on the same page. And then, really, game making is what I love about it is that it's a process of discovery. So we're play testing once a week or at least every 2 weeks from the very beginning until the end. So really trying out an idea and playing it and getting feedback, and it's totally brutal and emotional, and you're like, oh God, everything's gonna be terrible. But just being okay with that and folding that into your process.
I've got two bits of advice, one from Karl Marx and one from Monty Python. Karl Marx wrote a lot of twaddle, but one of the things he wrote that wasn't too bad was about alienation and people who build things in isolation and don't know why it connects and how it connects, end up building things that are terrible. So try and prevent alienation and let someone understand why they're making that bucket and why it's so incredibly vital, so that they make a really good bucket. To kill a bucket goes on people's heads. It's a very important bucket. So alienation, try and prevent that through communication. And then on Monty Python, Graham Chapman and John Cleese work together a lot, and they often said their best ideas were often a bad idea, misheard, and then told to someone else. I wouldn't have too much communication, maybe muffled. Probably the best idea, but that's how good ideas happen. They happen by sharpening it.
Well, I'll comment that from the other direction, just to be argumentative, which is, I think there's something really delicious about a single voice and there's a purity of communication that can come from one person who's really trying to get a message across. I think it's getting harder and harder in games to do that because it's getting more and more challenging to to be the master of all those different domains. But yeah, I think of something like Braid maybe as an example that's close to that. I know John Blow had lots of friends, lots of communications, but man, he was really busting butt on that game for 3 years, largely by himself. And I mean, it really comes out. That is him in a box when you play that game. There's something lovely about that.
Great, thank you for the question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Lawrence, and I've got a simple question for a panel for the future. How many years before games overtake Hollywood?
In what way?
In what sense, yeah.
In terms of just pure entertainment value, because you see with productions, with games, I mean, they rival, Hollywood productions. It just seems that right now, as it stands, people are paying $20 to go see an IMAX movie, and I can go pay $60. I can get 20 to 40 hours as opposed to 2 to 3.
Don't say that too loud. The movie theaters are going to start wanting to charge you $60.
I think it's more money.
Yeah, but
Why do you care?
Because I like games better.
Legitimately, I don't ask it to be facetious. It's like, it's like asking when are we going to have more box office than car sales. So, I don't care. Cars are cars. Games are awesome. They're great. They're fabulous. They're everywhere. I love them. Everyone I talk to plays them. They're ace. They're more important to me than movies. I don't care about Hollywood's box office. I mean, I'm just interested in, literally, is it going past Best Buy and going, there's too many computer games, not enough computer games? It's like, no, is it because we don't have adverts on TV? We have adverts on TV. It's like, I'm not sure why it should worry. I mean, in volume and money, we're probably close. In closeness to people's hearts and how much people care about it, we're probably close, if not high. If you're talking about penetration into the market space, I'd say we were further along than they were. So but probably cocaine use, we're probably way down. Probably having movie stars. Like we don't have computer game stars, so we're not on the National Enquirer pages, and we don't on the gossip rags. But I sort of go, I genuinely don't care.
I think maybe to bring it back around to probably what you're asking is, and what Paul has put a stake in the ground for, is that that it's not as if we have to say, when does painting replace written word? When does music replace any other form of artistic expression? What we should all be just absolutely pleased with is the fact that we live in a time where we have access to more forms of communication, for more forms of expression than at any other point in human existence. So it's not about saying, well, I'm a gamer. Guess what? Everybody's a gamer. And guess what? In one more generation, that's even going to be true. And so, what we say, 2 more election cycles, we'll have a president who grew up solidly within the Nintendo generation, right? So that doesn't mean they're going to necessarily like movies any less. It's a different form of communication. It's a different form. In fact, it's not interactive. It's designed to be, imparted to the viewer. So I'd say, I agree with Paul, we're already there. And for so many of us that grew up with this, which is one of the reasons why the exhibition is here, we've always known this to be true. We've always known it to be important. And we now have the opportunity to discuss it, have that dialogue from this point forward. And so I'd say let there be movies and games.
And we're better.
Matching jacket and shoes. Okay, I think we have time for possibly 1 or 2 more questions. Yes. Next, Wired.com reporter Chris Melissinos.
Hello. Well, this microphone is actually taller than me. That must be symbolism or something. And first, I got a quick question. And this exhibit is about video games as an art form. You probably had exhibits as movies as an art form. But okay, no, scratch that. I had a different question. Forget everything I said. I got a different question. Okay. With video games in such a mainstream market today, don't you think that Have you ever seen TV shows today and they're playing Donkey Kong on their Xbox 360 with the controller held upside down with the VMU stuck into the... When do you think we'll actually get to the point when you can go up to someone, take a game out of your pocket, put it in their face, and they'll say, oh, this is how you play it, this is what the game's called, this is what the company is. When do you think we'll have the mass, not just media, but mass consumer media emergence, where you show anyone, tell anyone, hey, Citizen Kane, they'll obviously know what that movie is. But if you go up to anyone and say, God, Molly, Darcy! They would be awesome.
So I'll leave it to you. I always move myself.
I mean, I feel like we're kind of there. Like Angry Birds. Like who doesn't know? I mean, it's said everywhere. That's been, you know, mocked in almost every TV show at this point. Like it's maybe it's one thing, or Farmville. You know, maybe there's just a sort of few stars in the sky right now that really show that, but I think it's just showing that's only the beginning. Like that's just the first crest of the wave that's coming.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think just recently there have been a couple things. Mike was talking about the Jimmy Kimmel stuff earlier. So I think if you watch Jimmy Kimmel, you'll see him bring games on there now and then. And every time he does, I'm just like, oh, thank God.
Right.
And then amusingly on the Daily Show a couple nights ago, he had, for any of you WoW players, they had Leroy Jenkins run across. It's hilarious. So I think we're close. It feels like we're at a turning point. But I don't think people will. You'll never be able to pull. I don't know what Katamari Damacy. I wish that would be one they'd recognize. We're getting.
But going forward, I think it's happening.
Absolutely.
Herman Cain used a Pokemon quote. Be a challenge.
And by the way, I have Katamari Damacy in my PS Vita sitting down here in my bag. So if you walked up to me and said, Katamari, I'd go, yes, I know it's on. Thank you for your question again.
I had a question for Kellee. But a lot of people, I guess, on the internet were drawing comparisons between Journey and other games, Dear East. Yeah, they're saying those are both experience games, that they kind of blur the line between a movie and a game. I was wondering if you sort of saw those being more popular in the future, or if those would be something that would develop their own genre over time.
Yeah.
If you could repeat the question, because I don't know if your audio came through. So
she was just talking about comparing my pretentious game with other pretentious games. with Dear Esther, which was recently available for download on Steam, and is a game in which you play through this fairly rich 3D environment, and you're walking through, and there's a narrative that's unfolding, and that's kind of it. You're just walking around the space, and in my game Journey, you do a lot of walking around as well as the story unfolds for you. And yeah, I hope that there are more of all types of games. I mean, that's really my whole goal and my whole thing is that I don't think one type is better than another. It's just I want to see more variety of experiences so that, you know, I can come home and say, like, I'm in the mood for this kind of game, and that there is that kind of game there. Sometimes I want to engage in intense combat with my friends online, and we'll play Call of Duty. And sometimes I want to just move around a gorgeous environment, and I used to have to get on Halo 2 with nobody there and just do that and move around on the online environment. So now, you know, you have an actually created experience for that. That's really cool. It's really exciting.
There was a game that Random Robin did called The Manhole many years ago, which I think is really one of the earliest predecessors of this sort of experiential game that's just about sort of poking around. And then it obviously was a long time ago, and the technology was relatively limited, but there was no sort of point to it. I think that was one of the beautiful things about it. It was just an experience of exploring. And I think that's what, you know, Kellee games do a lot of, and I think, you know, games like Dear Esther do, and I think it's a great form.
Well, thank you. And that was all the time we have for questions. I do apologize. We do have to clear the auditorium now at the end of this panel, but hopefully, our panel is